Howdy, all of you delicious people. Do not tell me the name of this movie, or you might lose your power. If you had any superpowers, or special abilities, or whichever, Shazam! I'll say the movie for you, so I might lose my power if I ever had any. So, it's a goofy thing. So, Shazam. How did I feel about this film? And all that rigmarole. So, Shazam. If I were to have reviewed this the first time around, you would have a drastically different opinion that I had for this movie compared to now. This movie does have dumb things in it. It does have stupid things in it, but I can tolerate the stupidity. I can tolerate the dumb parts of film. And I can have fun watching this movie because when you're really looking at it, you're looking at a movie that is scripted to just be like, well, if a young kid was to have these powers, what would he do? And so we kind of have to go through that approach of like, well, hey, like this movie is probably more catered to a certain audience who is going to go into this movie and have like their kind of thought process met about this movie. Like, yeah, if I had superpowers, I'd go to a convenience store and try to buy beer too. High five, everybody. Yeah. So, like, really, there is technically a target audience for this film. But, like, it's a movie that I can have fun watching. I can have fun watching, but I also have complaints about it. Like, that's obviously probably going to come soon. The funny thing about this movie is the thing that I remember, and the only thing that I really remember when this movie is to come out, like, I didn't even remember much about this film when I watched it. I don't, like, this movie is a blur to me. I didn't even realize that this movie was actually done during Christmas time. I was like, oh, hey, a Christmas movie. I didn't even realize that. I was like, it really wasn't, like, my choice to, like, oh, I just randomly like went into this movie and I'm like, oh, I found out that it was Christmas afterwards. Who knew? Whoever watched this movie, I guess, more than once. So going into this, the thing that I remember about this movie is that people were to make fun of the costume, and Zachary Levi was to go on the internet and defend the costume himself. A lot of people were mentioning it's like, well, yeah, it looks like a pajama onesie, and he has a nightlight on his chest. What the heck is that? When really looking at it, these costumes were trying to fit a certain like style that DC was doing then. A lot of times, those costumes, probably looking at them now, all look goofy. Every single one of them probably just like, I don't like. I didn't like that variation of this character because I just don't like the costume. The costume looks blah 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 blah. But Zachary Levi defended it because like he's going to have to wear that for X amount of time, for X amount of movie, and so on and so forth. So, like, he's going to have to wear this thing, so we might as well defend it. But yeah, like, it is what it is. And supposedly in the sequel, they are going out of the way to try and change the costume drastically to showcase that this sequel is to seemingly have more money. So, big ups to that. Whether this sequel is going to be better or indifferent than this original run of movie, we'll have to see. So, going into Shazam, I would say I can actually like the Dr. Savannah villain in this story because, like, it does make sense with the way that they approach this story that the villain is random. Like, the villain actually makes sense. The only thing that we turn around and have something not make sense is the whole like seven deadly sin thing kind of feels random. Like that does feel like they were just kind of trying to figure out what villain they could have in this story, and they just had to go with a big, uh, like a big set of villains because of the way of which that this movie is to end. And with the way of which that this movie is to end, I'm like, man, are they gonna have to really dig into the the villains kind of rogues gallery when we have sequels here, because now we have to go on and like realize at any point in time that Shazam may or may not be alone at some point. So the one thing that I could say that could possibly be me complaining about this film, one thing that feels like a massive waste of time is them going through every single power set to see if Shazam has that. That I think does kind of get really annoying in this film to just be like, oh, well, do you have invisibility? Do you have super intelligence? Do you have do you have strength? Do you have what possible thing could you have? And so they go through and they keep going on and figuring this out. And I'm like, man, this eats up so much time. And we also have Dr. Savannah that doesn't really have to go after Shazam. Like, it feels like it's a thing that he's kind of like, well, I got nothing else to do, so I guess I'll go after this hero then, because I have nothing better to do, because I settled an old score, and now I got nothing. Kind of like how Shazam really doesn't have much to do in this film besides what the heck is his power. Like, we really don't have him doing, like, getting a cat out of a tree kind of, like, quests or tasks or whatever. Like, he's not stopping bank robbers or anything like that in this movie. But we do get a thing close to that, but even that, like, we again just have the whole like testing of powers thing being done again in this scenario. And so every bit of this movie is to just like, oh, well, like, what's this guy's name? What's his power? And like, I guess that could be a good origin setup. I also like how Billy is to seemingly be on this quest to go and find his mother. Like, I feel like I can say that. Like, I feel like setting this up because, like, I don't feel like I'm 100% going to give away the ending of it when like here, but I'll go into spoilers and we'll talk about it. So my overall grading of this Shazam movie is like, it was probably for me once before, it was probably awful before. Like, I really didn't enjoy it. But I think now I can just go on to say, like, you know what? This film is a middle of the road film. This movie is a okay film. We do have characters that are also kind of annoying because they're like, we of course have this be like Uh, every one of these grown-up characters have to be, of course, these young kids, and so like we have to approach it through like this. Of course, is set up for a target audience, but I can be much more satisfied about this film after its first watching of just kind of begrudgingly just like, oh, because also I think the real thing that is to kind of have me just be okay with this movie is just the fact that like if we were getting superhero movies like every day and superhero shows like every day like we kind of were for a while, then you would be a lot more picky. Then you would be like, ah, oh, well, this Shazam, boo, like this movie. But like now that we kind of have like kind of a breathing room of superhero films, and they're not like we're not getting freaking battered with them now. Like I think I can go on and just say like, okay, like, and plus also there's been some really garbage, some real garbage. Like I don't even think I really even want to go like, and I'm kind of wondering whether I'm really gonna want to go into Superman versus Batman. Like I think I'm willing to go and watch Man of Steel because I actually like that movie, and like I'm willing to watch the Christian Bale rest of that Christian Bale Batman series. But other than that, yeah, I just like I can go and watch Aquaman and see if that is to be better and whatever. But anyways, let's go into that double five. Let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers about Shazam. And let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time is about that time again to spoil this movie. Currently, right now, the second this recording, this movie is on HBO Max. Dare in fact, if you don't have an HBO Max subscription because you might not have any money, like any number of people, because it's the freaking holidays, you might have been saving up your money to eventually go and buy that gift for your kid or your lady or your man or whoever. So go out of your way to go onto a Google Play Store if you have a mobile device. Go on and search the word movie apps, and you should be able to find a app called Play HD TV. You can download that app. You should be able to see Shazam for free. It'll be a thing with apps, but you'll be able to see the movie for free. You can also conveniently Google search a app called Letter C Movies, and so it'll be C Movies, one letter and one word, and you should be able to, by golly, watch anything you want. Pretty much, drastically, just batter that search engine with something to just see if you can't find something on there, because more than likely you'll probably be searching for something that obviously it won't have. So, spoilers, everybody, spoilers. So, the very beginning of this movie takes place in 1974. It was a hot time in the city. No, it was a very wintry, Christmas-like time, of course, because this movie has a theme of Christmas for whatever reason. So, we end up having Thaddeus Savannah, who is going on a road trip with his dad, Mr. Savannah, and Sid, and they're going to some relatives. So, we end up having, of course, Thaddeus, who is having this magic 8 ball, and he's like, yeah, the magic 8 ball. So, Sid is to go on and take it, and is to ridicule his brother. And so we end up having, of course, Mr. Savannah, who's to tell Thaddeus, hey, like, you shouldn't have brought toys with you. And the kid's like, well, it's a magic 8 ball. So we go on and have Mr. Savannah, who is to just be like belittling his son, because that seems to be like a thing, like in this very short like scene of things that we have Mr. Savannah here as John Glover. Of course, if you guys have seen Smallville, you'll of course know that John Glover was also Lionel Luthor in the Smallville show. And like, like it's so nice to eventually have like John Glover like come in and kind of do these like DC roles. Like, he was also in of course, Batman and Robin, and uh, and so yeah, like he's been in quite a few things DC related. So it's kind of nice to just kind of keep introducing him here. It's always fun. So we all of a sudden have Thaddeus, who his magic 8 ball is to start having these symbols appear onto it, and after Thaddeus is to get this back from Sid. And so Sid is like, hey, you broke this. And so Thaddeus is to all of a sudden get the combination to this thing called the Rock of Eternity. A realm door is to open, Thaddeus is to go in. All of a sudden, we end up having this bizarrish wizard who is to have been a part of the council of wizards. And there's only one guy there, but it's the council of wizards. And so we, of course, have this wizard who is to tell Thaddeus that he has been chosen to be the person with pure of heart to take possibly the power of Shazam, and because this guy is growing weak of old age, and that he's just kind of barely hanging on, and so he needs a person to transfer over these powers. And because they had gone on to try and give someone powers once before, and they realized that that was a mistake. So Thaddeus goes on and does not actually take this wizard staff and speak the word of Shazam. Instead, he goes off and is to see this eye of sin. And all of a sudden, these sin gargoyles are starting to speak to him and whisper sweet nothings into him. And all of a sudden, Thaddeus is like, And so these gargoyles of sin are to go on and tempt Thaddeus to say, like, well, hey, like, your dad would belittle you and think that you have no power. Well, now, like, if you go and be our champion, you will have power. And so, all of a sudden, now that the wizard is to realize that Thaddeus is to be whispering sweet nothings with sin, and Thaddeus is so tempted to be the champion of the 7 deadly sins, the wizard is to go on and say, well, like, I guess you weren't the right boy chosen for this job, and so now I will banish you to go back to where you were. So Thaddeus reappears back into this car, and so all of a sudden now Thaddeus is to go and rattle off nonsense, like mentioning about all the stuff that he had seen. And so all of a sudden, of course, Mr. Savannah is to go on and be belittling his son, and he's taking his eyes off the wheel. And so all of a sudden, we end up having this car get into a car accident, and Mr. Savannah goes flying out of the windshield. And so we end up finding out that Mr. Savannah ends up in a wheelchair, and Sid has never forgiven his brother for that whole moment. So now, of course, we have the wizard that is to desperately ask for another champion, no matter how long it takes. Like, he desperately needs another champion. And so we now cue us having some time that has passed. So we, of course, have Billy and his mother that is at some carnival. And so Billy, of course, is to want a tiger. And the whole tiger thing really fits into the whole Shazam part of things, because I do remember that eventually the wizard is to come to Billy at some point in the comic books as this tiger thing. And the wizard would normally take several kinds of forms and stuff like that, but oftentimes he would come to him as a tiger, weirdly. So we have Billy as this young kid who is to go with his carnival with his mother. And so she's trying to go and hit these things to get this tiger. And so Billy's like, "Hey, Ma, the tiger." And she's like, "Yeah, I get it. I know, but I'm not gonna be able to make pro anytime soon. So, this is a little bit hard." So Billy's mother goes on and is to, instead of actually getting this tiger, she gets him a compass keychain instead. And so we have Billy's mother justifying to him this whole compass thing, that Billy will always find his way home with this compass. And so all of a sudden, we have both Billy and his mother kind of leaving to go through the carnival. All of a sudden, Billy ends up dropping the compass. He goes after it, to all of a sudden find his mother is now gone. So Billy's now combing through this carnival trying to find his mother, and his mother is now gone. So Billy is to go to these police officers, and so no one can go and find this Billy's mother. So we have Billy that just becomes a orphan. Billy becomes an orphan, and then he gets consistently put throughout the system, and then eventually at some point Billy, once he's to start to get old enough, he is just to start become a runaway. So Billy, now having these two police officers come to this one pawn shop, and Billy's to tell him, it's well, hey, I'm so glad that you came. There's a robber in this pawn shop. And so both of these police officers go into this pawn shop, and Billy's I can't believe that you guys fell for this. As Billy's going and locking in these police officers to go and use this police vehicle to go and try to find an address of his mother. So Billy goes on to go to this house to eventually find out that this Batson is to be black. So this woman is yeah, I don't think that you're my son. I don't think that's a possibility. And And he's like, okay. So now Billy is to push on and just realize, like, God, like, I have gone through every single list of every single Batson I can find. But we end up finding out that Billy's mother is technically out there. She had just changed her name and gone by someone else. So Billy then goes on and is to be taken in and is to go on and be put back into the system, but a system that ends up finding him foster parents very quickly, both Rosa and Victor. So Rosa and Victor take Billy in, and so it seems that both Billy and Freddy end up coming fast friends. Well, technically they're family, but still. So we have Freddy that's going on and is to see Billy kind of looking out the window to see how far down it is. And Freddy's like, hey, yeah, like it's a far drop, like I would know because like I've been thrown out that window once before. Like this family, it gets really rough. And so Billy's like, wow. And so Freddy's like, I'm joking. Like what really happened is I have cancer and I only have a couple months to live. And Billy's like, oh my God. And then Freddy's like, aha, I'm joking. Like, this kid is a pathological liar or whichever. But, and I don't know if I should be laughing at this point. It's kind of this weird, like, I don't think I should be laughing at this kid because he's horrible. But I'm laughing, so, anyways. So, we end up having, of course, both Billy and Freddy going to school the very next day. We also have, or no, wait, we also have, of course, both Rosa and Victor's oldest, who is Mary, who's seemingly going to get accepted into certain schools. It seems that Mary is to mention how, like her being adopted could help her go and easily come up with new friends and new family. And so, because we have this girl trying to work these people. And so, it seems that we eventually find she ends up later on in the movie getting accepted to this college. But then she realizes that she doesn't really want to go. That she'll miss her family too much. And so she's kind of in that like conundrum, and Shazam is to kind of work her through that when eventually Billy is to become Shazam. So Jesus Christ, just trying to do a review here. Good God, phone. That's what happens when you do like reviews at certain parts of the day that isn't like in the middle of the night. So anyways, so we of course push on, and so Billy is to go to school with Freddy, and so Freddy is to go on and mention that there was a study being done where eventually people were to be asked if they would have wanted to fly or be invisible. And so eventually Freddy is to say, it's like, well, when people were to be asked openly, they said they wanted to fly because that's like a hero power. And if you were to be invisible, that's kind of a villainous power. That's kind of a perv kind of power that you just kind of be watching over people. I'm like, Well, not exactly, because like no villain would see you coming, and like also like you'd probably have like being invisible would probably be like a thief kind of power, but like hey, no one would spot you anyways, but people would probably like spot you like stealing a number of things, because how would you be able to get out of there without anybody like not seeing you like lifting like an invisible item and having it float around for whatever reason? So unless you can like turn all of your clothes and whatever you're touching invisible, then maybe that works. But anyways, so we have we had Freddy, who was to go on and show Billy the night before a Batman Batarang and a Superman bullet that evidently was fired at Superman at some point. And so we have Freddy, who's mentioning to Billy, like, hey, I know that you took that Superman bullet the night before. And Billy's like, no, I didn't. And Freddy's like, I know that you're probably going to run away at some point. And Billy's like, no. So what eventually happens is after school, we end up having, of course, Freddy just kind of walking, and we all of a sudden have some vehicle kind of drive up and almost hit Freddy. And so I'm trying to see where the bullies of this story are technically. I think they're the Briars. Am I correct about that? Both Burke and Brett, maybe. Uh, um, I'm gonna say yes. So these two boys are going on, and they're wanting Freddy to forcibly pay for the damage that he did to their car. And Freddy's like, well, yeah, sure, I'm going to pay you in middle fingers. And so we eventually have Freddy getting beaten up by these two guys. And so it seems like nobody's really doing anything. So Billy steps up and he starts beating up these guys with Freddy's Freddy's little like walking cane like thing. And so shortly thereafter that moment, Billy is to get chosen by the wizard to go and take the Shazam power. So we have Billy going into the of uh, Rock of Eternal, and so Billy, of course, ends up getting chosen. And so, and I know there's a part that I'm not getting to, but we'll get to that shortly here. And so we have, of course, the wizard that is to tell Billy to grab his staff and say his name. And Billy's like, gross. And so we end up having, of course, Billy grab the staff and say this guy's name and get his power and go on and have the ability to release all the other Shazam like wizards also at some point if he does so choose, when he eventually has this staff with him. So, but before that, we have Dr. Sivana that is going on and is doing a lot of research on anybody who was to eventually also get chosen at some point, but it didn't turn out the way that it was supposed to by them getting superpowers for one reason or another. Maybe they decided against it. Maybe they decided it's like, well, like that seems to be a really uh, heavy burden for me to carry. No, I don't think so. But so Dr. Savannah and his assistant are going through these stories about people saying that they had seen something. And so Dr. Savannah is taking upon himself to hear this story out. And he is to mention to this girl about the symbols. And the girl's like, well, yeah, I did go and do a video about what had happened. And so he's like, okay, great, show me the video. So Dr. Savannah is to see this alarm clock that has these symbols on it. And so he's like, oh my God, like I finally figured it out. So Dr. Savannah is to realize that it's not just all the one row of symbols, that I guess you have to have this certain row of symbols, but have them being put together 7 different times. So you got to have the same row of symbols, but then do it 7 times over. And so we end up having this woman who is telling Dr. Savannah, it's like, well, you can't believe that all this is true. And so all of a sudden she goes on to touch this door to then like crumble like dust. And Dr. Savannah is just like, well, I think I can. So Dr. Savannah opens this door to go through it, and he basically disappears. So Dr. Savannah is now in the Rock of Eternity, and he is to now go on and see this wizard that is still, during the time this movie, still alive but fairly weak. And so Dr. Savannah goes on and is to take the Eye of Sin and be the 7 deadly sins champion, because Thaddeus is of course to be bitter about the fact that this wizard was to say what he had said about Thaddeus, and so it's been eating away at him forever, and now he's to go on and take this power and go on and have this power go into his eye, because it's the Eye of Sin, where supposedly Thaddeus is to be able to see other people with superpowers. I guess that's what the Eye of Sin is to be demonstrated here. So we have Dr. Savannah that is to go on and settle old scores by going and making his way to this boardroom where Mr. Savannah and his brother Sid are both on this boardroom. And so we have Dr. Savannah making his way in there to have this one guy going like, excuse me, like only board members are going in this room. And Dr. Savannah's like, like I can go in there. So we have of course Dr. Savannah going and taking all of these gargoyles, all these sins, and showcasing them all out to eventually have people slowly but surely get consumed and eaten and whatever, because it makes a lot of sense for these corporate fat cats to have some kind of horrible thing about them. So we end up having, of course, Dr. Savannah, who at first is to go after his brother Sid, and is to say it's like, well, hey, like, here's like a reflection on the past about the whole Magic 8 Ball thing. And Dr. Savannah is to ask if Sid can go and be chucked out of this room by his brother. And so Dr. Savannah goes and picks up Sid and chucks him out this window, and Sid is to fall to his death. So Dr. Savannah goes through and has all the like, I keep calling them gargoyles, but I don't know their, like, I don't care to know their like proper names. And what I know, of course, the seven deadly sins, and I guess I could just call them that, the sins. Like, that would probably be a lot easier. So Dr. Savannah is to have all the sins go after all these people and consume all of them, but leaving, of course, his father for last. And so we have Thaddeus, of course, having his father there and saying, like, I can't believe that you still, like, blame me, like, for being in this chair, and that, like, you were kind of, like, really always horrible to me. And so now, of course, we have greed going on and consuming Thaddeus's father. And so now let's go and let's talk about Shazam. So Shazam is to get his power, and so the first thing that he has to do is to go to Freddy and tell him, it's like, hey man, like, I have these like superpowers and I don't know what to do with them, and you're the only one that knows all this stuff. And Freddy's like, who are you? And so Shazam is like, hey, yeah, it's me, it's Billy. Like, you know, like, we talked about flying and invisible, like, or and being invisible. And so, like, now that I have these superpowers, like, you're the only guy that I can know that will help me, like, figure this out. So Billy and Shazam go off, and so we, of course, have Freddy kind of going into the common powers of Shazam, trying to think, it's like, well, hey, like, can you fly? And so Shazam all of a sudden is to jump off this car. He falls. He's like, well, like, I guess I can't fly. And so we have them go through, like if Shazam could turn invisible and he can't, and then so Freddy is to pretend that Shazam is invisible, and Shazam's like, oh, great, I'm invisible, yeah, that must be my power. And so all of a sudden Freddy's like, no, you're not invisible, like, I was just testing if you had super intelligence and being invisible, and so I guess you have neither. So, because there was guys heckling Shazam for his costume. So we go on and we consistently have both Freddy and Shazam going and doing a YouTube video, like, set of things, and being YouTubers, and going and showing every bit of every one of these tests and making a YouTube channel off of it, so I guess they can make money. And so I'm sure they, like, what they did, like, did really, really well, I guess, to then afford them to then turn around and be like, hey man, I'm gonna go and buy a house, like, I should go and buy a lair. And so, because Shazam is to find out, the very first power he's to find out is that he has lightning hands. And so, like, oh my god, like, you have, like, superpower, like, you do have a superpower. So eventually they test that like Shazam has super strength that he can punch through this wall or punch through this column technically. So we have now Shazam going through this convenience store and he wants to go and try and buy a thing of beer and because he looks old enough. And so he goes to the beer section, gets a thing of beer, and all of a sudden this convenience store is being robbed. And so now we end up having, of course, these guys with these guns, and so Shazam is to go on and tell these guys like, hey, like stop right there, kind of thing. And so we have these guys going and lighting up this guy with bullets, and he's like, oh my god, like I'm bulletproof. Oh my, that's a power I have. And so Freddy is like, well, wait a minute. Like, is your suit bulletproof or are you bulletproof? And so they end up having to shoot him in the head, and they find out that like he is bulletproof. So he's like, okay. So eventually they go on and tie these thugs up, and they of course tell this convenience store clerk, hey, you're welcome. So plus we have kind of Shazam going and saying that he's kind of the human uh like ID to where he doesn't have to get carded. So Shazam also does another grown-up thing, and he heads up to this strip club, and so he's to realize that he's out of money because like those women were really persuasive in there. So like I guess Shazam couldn't go on and like show any kind of photos or whatever or videos or anything like that that he took with a cell phone or nothing like that because of course he couldn't. Like it's just done as a joke here. But we go back to this spot also. So eventually Shazam is to or Billy is to start thinking it's like, well, hey, like what do I even need school anymore for? Like really when like looking at this, like I can just be superhero for the rest of my life and I don't need to go to school anymore. And so Billy is almost thinking about running away again. And so because Freddy and Billy are thinking about what house they're to live in, and Freddy's to say it's like, well, you should get it like a 7-room house, and Billy is just like, or Shazam is like, well, wait a minute, like, so am I going to be running a foster home here? And so Freddy's just like, well, yeah, I guess. Like, I guess that we should, like, probably just. Because Billy was to say that he only wanted, like, one room, and that was, like, for him, and that was it. So we go on, and we eventually have Freddy, who's to mention to his friends that he can have this superhero come to him at some time of lunch, and like he's making these claims and everybody's like, yeah, right, like I don't believe that at all. And so eventually on this supposed day we have Freddy supposedly calling somebody, and the girl grabs his phone, is like, he's calling nobody, like he's lied to us. And so they all just kind of walk off. So Freddy is to be upset with Billy because technically Freddy had really helped Billy, and Billy had just kind of turned around and realized it's like, well, hey, thanks for the help, but like scram kind of thing. I'm not gonna like I'm not gonna go and like help you with anything. So So eventually, what ends up happening is Billy is to eventually realize it takes him a while, but once he's to say the word Shazam, he ends up realizing that he can turn this power off and on. Because when he goes back home, still looking like Shazam, he then realizes that he can go and say the name Shazam, and then he turns his power off. And so he's like, oh, like that's how it works now. And we end up having the power going out in this home because Billy is to say Shazam. So we go on and we have Billy who is just kind of make some side money going and doing selfies with certain people, or going and doing these like lightning shows, lightning hands, lightning hands, lightning hands, or bolt hands, or whatever he says. So they it takes him a while to come up with a name for this character, and so they keep coming up with all these kind of goofy names that are to be really goofy, and like they never come up with Captain Marvel at all and make the joke about it, because Shazam for the longest time was actually Captain Marvel, but then eventually it just came down to it where it made sense for them to finally change that name. Plus, there's also another Captain Marvel out there, so like you might as well just finally just change it to Shazam. So, which I actually like the name Shazam better. If they would have kept Captain Marvel, it would have just been like that name doesn't really make sense. So we go on and we have, of course, it starts to become slowly but surely, like Darla ends up finding out that Billy is Shazam, and like he has to tell the truth because he comes home one day dressed as or with Shazam's power, and so he has to go and explain it. And then we end up having Shazam going and seeing Mary having her conundrum about school. And so Shazam is going on and calling her Mary and saying that she lives in a foster home and all kinds of things, as if this random Shazam guy knows so much about her. So eventually we have Shazam going on and accidentally using his powers after Billy is to do this show, and Freddy is to, of course, be upset with him because Billy is just taking advantage of these powers, and Billy is not really helping people with these powers. So, because there's nothing really for him to do. There's no one for him to really save here at Fawcett City. Or Fawcett Central, because that's the thing that says at the back of this school. It says Fawcett Central at this one lunchroom. So what happens is Shazam accidentally uses his power to cause a bus to lose its tire. And so all of a sudden this bus is going and falling off this bridge. And now Shazam is to try and use his power. But he doesn't quite know exactly what to really do here. So Shazam goes and places a mattress where this bus is going to fall. And he's like, huh? And they're like, no, that's not going to work. So all of a sudden this bus comes falling down. And Shazam is to go on and catch this bus. But all of a sudden now, we end up having this dog in the way, and so Shazam is telling this dog to get out of the way. And so eventually this bus is to fall. And so, like, oh, thank God you saved us. So all of a sudden, right after this, we have Thaddeus who appears and is to now go on and fight Shazam. And Shazam doesn't realize that he's going to be evenly matched here because Shazam is telling Thaddeus, it's like, well, hey, man, like, I don't think you know, but, like, I'm basically invincible. And then all of a sudden, Thaddeus is to punch Shazam in the chest and then punch him in the face. And so we have Shazam who has this, like, bloody nose temporarily. He's like, oh, like, wow, I guess I was wrong about that. So all of a sudden, Shazam goes on to go and low blow Thaddeus. And he's like, yeah, that's street rules, buddy. And so Thaddeus just goes on to grab Shazam, fly him into the sky because Thaddeus can now fly at this point. And so Thaddeus goes on and is to drop Shazam, and now Shazam is to realize, like, okay, I have to figure out how to fly. Like, I have to believe I can fly. I'm like, isn't, like, I think there should have been some R. Kelly I Can Believe I Can Fly song coming in here somewhere, but I guess not. So we have, of course, Shazam that is going and making his way to fall. I'm thinking, you know what? Like, if he really, like, falls and, like, he's not gonna die. Like, I don't think he's gonna fall from impact and be crushed. So, but luckily we have Shazam just in time stop himself from landing, and then he realizes, like, oh my god, I can technically float. Like, let's now see if I can kind of fly here, which he doesn't perfectly do it. But so both Thaddeus and Shazam are, like, fighting through this mall, and, like, here's where it does actually get pretty fun, where now Shazam has gone into this one clothing room where people are kind of trying on clothes, and so Shazam's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, like, I'm gonna be here for a while," and so Shazam is now looking into this mirror and he's like, you know what, like, why am I fighting this guy for? Like, if anything, I don't need to fight this guy, and so, like, I can just run away, like um like Shazam or just Billy has been known to just run away from things. And so why can't this just be another thing that he runs away from? So we have Shazam that is kind of going through this mall and is to go through this toy store, and Shazam goes and tosses this one Batman doll at Thaddeus, and Shazam is like, "Get him, Batman! I am Batman." Like, and I thought that like this whole, like, mall sequence was actually kind of fun. So we go on and we have eventually Shazam trying to figure out again how to fly here to get out of this mall, and but eventually it goes to where Thaddeus is to go and get, of course, Billy, and so Billy goes and Shazams, and Thaddeus is to kind of cover his eyes, and Billy goes and kind of, like, makes his way off into the number of people and kind of fades away, and so we end up having it to where, of course, Thaddeus is to realize that Freddy was to go on and be talking to Shazam, so Freddy is to be grabbed by Thaddeus and, like, tell me where he is, tell me who he is. And so we now have Freddy leading us to, of course, Thaddeus making his way back to Billy's foster home. But Billy is to finally go on and find out from his foster family where his biological mother is. So, and here's the part that I kind of least like about this movie, because we have this guy who is to have this one quest and one quest only, and we end up finding out that his mother is just a piece of garbage. I don't like this whole explanation, but really, like, his mother really just couldn't be bothered with really just Billy in this whole scene. So Billy is to go and find his biological mother, and because Pena was to go and find, or Pedro was to go on and find Billy's notebook and eventually kind of show this to the other kids. And so we have Eugene that goes and through certain records and certain things to go on and say it's like, well, yeah, all I did was really illegal, but like it was worth it to go and find your mother. So Billy goes on and is to find, and I know I'm kind of all over the place with this one. It's okay. So Billy goes on and is to, of course, find his biological mother. And so I think I might have to pause here for a second. All right. So we now have it where Thaddeus has gone and seemingly forced Shazam to now run off. And so Billy is to go and find his biological mother. And so Billy's to go on and find out that his mother had basically left him at this carnival, that she saw these two cops taking care of her son, and she's like, well, these two cops could have taken better care of my son than I could have, so I just decided to just bounce, basically. That this woman, I think, was just wanting to come up with some opportunity to ditch her son, and this evidently was the perfect time for her to just like, okay, well, I'm gonna pull the ripcord on this whole thing. And we end up having like Billy, who is to hear a man's voice. I'm like, well, is that dad? And so so Billy's mom is just like, no. So we end up having this mother that is to mention that uh, that it seemed that she was like at a bad time to have a kid, and so it's like good that eventually that this kid turned out the way he did, and hopefully had found like some other family and so on and so pushing this kid to realize that, well, hey, I don't need to find home anymore. Here's this compass. Goodbye. So Billy's to realize that he had found the right home all along, and it was with his foster family. And so Billy is, of course, get a cell phone call from Freddy, who all of a sudden is actually Thaddeus. And it's like, well, hey, like, come back here so I can get my power from you. Like, I can get your power. So we go on and we have, of course, Shazam and kind of Thaddeus Thaddeus is in the house and Shazam is outside the house. We have this goofy line delivery talking about coming inside and this and that. Like, you come inside or I'm going to go in there. and this and that. So we have Shazam coming into the place, this home, and Thaddeus had already gone on and wrote the Rock of Eternity kind of symbols on this door so that way they can go into the Rock of Eternity. So that way Thaddeus can go and get this staff and have Thaddeus give Shazam his power. So Shazam is to go on and try to give in to Thaddeus because like these kids are involved. So Shazam, Thaddeus, and all these kids are to go into the Rock of Eternity. And so what ends up actually happening is that Shazam is to realize that Thaddeus is to get weak when all of the sins are to be outside of him. And that he is to have one sin inside of him because there's 6 of these characters here, but Shazam is to realize that this guy is now weaker because there was to be this one point, there was to be a scratch on Thaddeus' head that healed. And so all of a sudden, we now have Shazam's foster like kids all wielding all of these weapons to now fight off Thaddeus because like, yeah, like we're gonna take you down. And so they fling this batarang at Thaddeus and he ends up getting stabbed. And so Shazam is like, well, thank God that I didn't sell that batarang. So everybody all goes off and scrambles to go and find some other door to go into. And they weirdly find that there are like crocodile men playing poker and all kinds of other weird doors that eventually they are forced to now close. And so Shazam is like, nobody opened any more doors. Like, this is the worst thing to do. So Freddy is to realize at some point that Shazam was to have this power to think of a location and to be able to appear there. So now Shazam is thinking of a location for them to get back to, and he of course thinks of the strip club. And so all of the kids and Shazam are now on the strip club, and Mary is to hold one of the kids to kind of hold her eyes to just kind of cover up. And Mary's like, seriously, out of all the places that you could have come back to, you immediately think of this place? And Shazam is like, oh, well, like, that's what I was thinking. So we end up having, of course, some kids going out there like, yeah, like some of the guys. So we now go on and have Shazam, because Thaddeus is kind of going to be behind them shortly. So Shazam decides to have all these kids go to this carnival, and so now they're all like trying to hide out. Shazam is to, of course, change back into Billy, and so we, of course, have them kind of hiding out. And so all of a sudden, Thaddeus is to come out and now eventually tell Shazam, it's like, well, hey, like, come out of hiding because, like, I'm going to go on and, like, hurt these people if you don't come out and face me because you're a coward and you're hiding. So we have Thaddeus, who, of course, is to use his power of these 7 deadly sins to create all these chaos, this chaos. And so we eventually have certain kind of carnival rides getting in destruction because of this whole battle and so on and so forth. So Eventually, we again have Shazam having to forcibly give in to Thaddeus because he's far too strong. We have Shazam trying to take down these seven deadly sins, but he is to find it very complicated to do so. Also, we have at one point where Thaddeus is fighting Shazam, and Shazam goes on and is to be Billy again to kind of run through this ice, and then he eventually falls through the ice, and then Thaddeus is trying to drown him, and so we have, of course, Shazam trying, or we have Billy trying to yell out Shazam, but he's drowning. So all of this eventually goes and has Shazam kneeling down to Thaddeus with this staff to seem to give in to what Thaddeus wants, but instead, Shazam is to realize that all these other uh, kids could also get powers as well. So Shazam goes and takes the power, the staff from Thaddeus, and goes on and tells all the kids to touch this staff and to yell out his name. And so all the kids yell out Billy, and he's like, no, like the name that I call out all the time. And they're like, oh, Shazam. And so all the kids end up having this superpower, and then Shazam ends up breaking the staff so that way nobody else could get this power. So now we have, of course, all of the kids going after all these sins, taking them out one by one, and we have some pretty good banter with Adam Brody being, of course, the superpowered Freddy, and we just kind of have these goofy other dialogues with these other characters. We have at one point a tilt-a-whirl that ends up almost tilting over, and so all the characters have to go and scramble and get all the civilians away from this tilt-a-whirl. But eventually, the tilt-a-whirl does topple over. So we go on and we eventually have it where Shazam is to figure it out that that of course Thaddeus is to have one last sin inside, and he had figured out who all the other sins were, but now Shazam wants Envy to come out and play, and so he's like, "Yeah, you little runt, you little like smallest one." So Envy, of course, gets triggered to then rush out of Thaddeus, and Thaddeus almost goes and falls off this building, and he's holding on. And so Envy goes on and is to fight Shazam, and so Shazam calls out Shazam to then wipe out Envy. And then so Shazam is to go on and grab Thaddeus and be like, okay, like now we're going to get all your little buddies and collect them all. So Shazam goes off back to the carnival and pulls out the Eye of Sin from, of course, Thaddeus. And then all of a sudden we have this now like Eye of Sin. And so all these sins are to be collected. And so Shazam is like, wait a minute, what are you saying? Like, Eye of Sin? Like, I can have how much power? And he's like, oh, I'm tempted. Oh, no, I'm just joking. And so everybody gets a pretty good laugh. It's like Shazam has technically a ton of power anyways. And so it'll be interesting to see where the heck that they actually put this Eye of Sin somewhere down the road. So we now go on, and so we eventually have Billy and the family all going and sitting together to have a meal. And so now we have Billy going and saying grace and having this bizarre rhyme that they are to say when they are to say grace. and like Billy couldn't have been bothered to go and put his hand in before, but now he can because he's now part of the family. So we then go on and see Thaddeus in prison, and he's scribbling all these things on this prison wall in this end credit scene. And we have this worm-like thing called Mr. Mind telling Thaddeus, it's like, well, hey, like we're gonna like they're basically setting up that these two characters are going to uh, get into business from one another because this worm-like thing is called Mr. Mind, and so it seems like he's going to be the next villain for this sequel film, and we of course have a goofy villain for the end credit scene here. So, or is it Professor Mind? Um, anyways, so we also have an end credit scene where Freddy is to get what he had wanted was to have Shazam appear in the cafeteria to have lunch with Freddy. But that's not all that's coming. All of a sudden, Superman is also coming to lunch. But it's a Superman where we don't conveniently see his head. I wonder why. Because they couldn't have paid Henry to show up. They couldn't have had Henry like I'm sure he would probably just like no to have that like little tiny cameo where I have to go and work out like crazy to like be in this cameo. No, like to be in that skin tight suit for like 5 seconds of a film. No. So, and they ended up just not showing his head. They cropped it out. So I wouldn't have done it either. It's like, is that gonna like say that I'm gonna be in Shazam 2? No. Well, then what's the point? But if he is in Shazam 2, like that would be great to just cement that going forward they're going to re-put Henry Cavill back as Superman because technically they should anyways because this Justice League Snyder cut world should continue, right? Whether we like all the actors or whoever that's playing whoever or not, like it's still going to be a thing. So we go on, and I think that is it for like everything. That is it for this movie. Probably not as a whole. There might have been some things that I wanted to get to and probably didn't. But uh, yeah, I think I got through the bulk of this movie. But yeah, we'll kind of see how this all breaks down and whatever at the end of all this. But I think I'm gonna get out of here. So yeah, it's weird. Like again, I didn't choose this movie thinking like, oh yeah, this is a Christmas film. Like no, it was just a bizarre coincidence. But with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. So like I'm trying to think if there's anything left that I should have covered somewhere because I feel like I'm gonna. Oh yeah, there's a billion things that I forgot about. I feel like that's coming, but I think I got the meat and potatoes down of this one. So, with that said, I'm going to go out of my way to say that it's about that double amount of time for me to say goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.